Earth Day had never even been invented. Environmentalism was like a whole new idea. Me and some other girls in my class decided we were going to start a recycling club, which recycling didn't exist either. And so I spent my time washing out our dogs' cans, and my dad thought I was completely, out of my mind. He said, this is never going to catch on. That was the beginning of activism. That was like, okay, you can actually do a little piece. And we started, I think it was the worst acronym ever it was Youth Against Pollution, which is YAP. It was the first group I ever started. And I don't know, it kind of caught on. I went away to school. I was totally a fish out of water, right? Here I was, this kid from Texas in Rhode Island at this kind of fancy Ivy League school. And the janitors, one of whom in my building, Eddie, went on strike against the university for better pay. And so I got involved in supporting the strike for the janitors. And then frankly, I spent the rest of my time at Brown. That became part of my education. How do you navigate an institution where the values that they're espousing aren't necessarily the values they're living every day? It was that strike probably that made me, when I left college, become a union organizer in Texas. When I left Brown, I moved to Guatemala, lived with a family, learned Spanish, and then I started working on the border with garment workers. I kind of bounced around, and I eventually moved to New Orleans and worked with a bunch of people to organize hotel workers. And it changed my life. It completely changed how I think about work, and frankly, the privilege I have for getting to do the jobs that I have had in my lifetime. Very few people get to choose what they do for a living. Part of, I think, our political problems in this country is we really don't walk in other people's shoes. We don't know what they're going through. I spent a lot of time organizing immigrants who came from Latin America, who literally crossed hundreds of miles, like risked their lives to get to Los Angeles to become a janitor. And we're still willing to risk their job to go on strike to actually get a better wage. That's courage. If you're fighting for things, social change, progressive change, you lose more than you win. The fight we made during President Obama's tenure to get birth control covered under the Affordable Care Act. And it sounds like maybe it even sounds small, but it was like a radical, it was really hard to get done. And I'll just never forget that happening. And it wasn't just because of what we did when I was at Planned Parenthood. It was like decades of people, back in the Griswold years, like fighting even to get birth control to be legal. I remember the day I was sitting in the Planned Parenthood office and President Obama called and he said, Cecile, I just wanted you to know I'm about to announce at the White House that from now on, birth control will get covered by all insurance plans at no cost for all people. And I felt so honored to be the person who got the call. Obviously, it was millions of people that had made that happen. It's because the women who showed up at town hall meetings. It's because people who elected folks. It's because people who ran for office. It's because people who were in office fought for. All of these things had to happen for this big piece of change to take place. Once they all started covering Viagra, it was sort of like, this is ridiculous, right? You're covering Viagra, you're not covering birth control. But I have to say, I look at some of the things happening today and the hypocrisy is so profound. The same states that, are banning abortion won't pay for prenatal care, won't pay for new mothers' health care. I would be at Planned Parenthood and folks would go, can't you just explain to members of Congress that investing in Planned Parenthood actually helps prevent unintended pregnancy? And it was hard to explain to people that actually logic is like the last thing that is influential when you're lobbying Congress. To me, that's like sort of the number one political lesson to learn, which is what is motivating this other person? All of those folks, you can have the biggest, baddest lobbyists in Washington, D.C. What they really care about is what are folks back home saying? And if you can't actually mobilize people back in their district to say they care, it's not going to matter. After the Women's March, when there was this huge fight over defunding Planned Parenthood, all the Women's March folks, we just then deployed to town hall meetings, and you couldn't hold a congressional town hall meeting without women in pink hats and signs going after them. But that was because people didn't want to hear from people back home, and women were not going to stand by while Planned Parenthood was defunded. That's what real organizing and real political power is about. It's about when people care enough back home to speak up, to show up, to vote. We can't build an economy in this country, rebuild it after COVID, or sort of move into this next century without women. You can't treat pregnancy as a problem and maternity care as a deficit if you're going to have women work for you. Affordable childcare is very hard to find. Obviously, we have no paid family leave consistently across the country. The barriers for women's participation in the workforce are still really high, and particularly women with lower incomes. Women are working minimum wage jobs. They have no safety net. And their decisions about rearing a family, raising a family, whether or not to have a family, often are economic decisions, and this country doesn't make it any easier. I'll never forget when we had this wave of women come into Congress. Actually, a lot of women who were inspired by Hillary's race and angered by her loss. And so we just had this flood of thousands of women raising their hand to run for office. The representation, at least for the Democrats in Congress, really changed. More women, more people of color, more people from different backgrounds. But I'll remember being in the basement in one of these Capitol offices where this new group of women were there, and some of the women who'd been there a long time, and they said, they were talking about their agenda, and they said, look, the men in Congress agree with us on things like paid family leave and childcare and all this. But when it comes to getting the money, it's roads, it's bridges, it's, everything but. And it was really, for me, it was a great realization, which is everyone talks the talk, but at the end of the day, you need people who are going to lay their body down. I think more women in office, it just changes the conversation. I've thought about running for office before, and I've always kind of gone back to the side of we need people that are holding everybody accountable that's in office, helping support the good folks that are in. And that's just been my way. Maybe I could have made more of a difference of being in office, but you also kind of have to find your joy. And for me, the joy is seeing people come together and make change and be inspired to do more than any one individual can do on their own. People say why do you still feel encouraged? It's because I just met this 7th grader in Austin, Texas, who organized against the abortion ban. I guess maybe I do kind of see myself in her. Here she is, and she texted me the other day when the decision came down. She says, now we've really got to get organized, and we've got to be loud. And I'm just like, yes, Vienna, yes. I just was back in Austin for a rally for gun reform, and there I look up on the stage, and she's got her little box. She's standing up there. She's rallying the troops. I was like, that's who I want to invest in. That's what gives me hope, is that young people, we invest in them. They're going to change this country. They're going to change the world. That's always how it's happened. After the 2016 election, it seemed like there were a lot of people in certain circles saying, why do women vote against their own interests? And I just said, well, have you spoken to them? I think if you really want to understand what women's anxieties, hopes and dreams, but also their fears are, you have to get back on the ground and actually talk to women. I spent a lot of time after the election and organizing with other women to go around the country and actually just hold listening sessions. I guess that, to me, why those early union organizing days are so important. You learn so much by listening to other people, because people will tell you where they're coming from. And to be a good organizer, you have to be a good listener. It's the most important thing you can do. This was something I learned poignantly at Planned Parenthood, which is when you put these labels on people, it completely ends the conversation, right? Pro-life or pro-choice or whatever. Because in fact, most people don't think this is a political issue. And what we found, and why we quit using those labels at all, was that they knew what they felt like their own position would be for them, pregnancy, but they also definitely did not feel like they could make that decision for every other woman in this country. And it's why, honestly, we won ballot initiatives in South Dakota and Mississippi and states where you'd think this is never going to be possible. But people respected the fact that women, families, couples, they had to make their own decisions. And making a decision about pregnancy is one of the most personal and probably important decisions you'll make in your lifetime. It's hard to know what to do. I mean, the number one thing people literally will stop me on the subway and go, what am I supposed to do? And which is why I eventually wrote a book, because I was like, okay, I just got to give everybody the book. I can't tell them everyone what to do. I just think because we have this, particularly as women, we think we're supposed to fix everything. And so suddenly we're now, oh my God, how are we going to fix the country? How are we going to fix all this that's happening? And we don't. And I just try to tell people that you don't. You just have to do more than you're doing now and find something. It doesn't matter. Maybe you want to run for office, but that's okay if you don't. But you could volunteer in a campaign. You could join an organization. You could start a club. It's certainly more rewarding than yelling at the television set or just, completely giving up. Just do something else. Do something more. And it doesn't have to be the perfect thing. My friend Bob Kafka says, he's a disability rights activist, and he's like, his motto is, we're going to do it even if it's wrong. Maybe it's not the exact right thing, but it's going to be more than what you're doing now.